Quit teasing me.
And happy Wednesday to the world out there, gentlemen. How's it going? How are you? Happy Wednesday. Half pre-draft podcast.
Yeah, I think.
The draft, woo!
Real quick. The draft seems like it came here earlier than I think, right? Even though it's the same time every year.
I guess it feels a little soon. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I think it sort of snuck up on me a little bit. Just
What even is time?
Right.
Especially for you guys, time has no meaning in the past 6 weeks, yeah?
None.
It's been weird, for sure.
It's taken me a long time to get into football mode.
I think that's kind of the thing. We talked about this in the previous podcast last week, where sports are a opportunity to kind of escape, the real world, the reality, just take your mind off stuff. And what happens when the world is so impacted that even like your hobby, your leisure stuff is impacted? Like, what do you do?
I mean, like if you're a major like baseball guy right now, and that's like the thing you look forward to every year, you're super stressing. I think right now, aren't you?
I don't know how you can rationalize something, because baseball has the longest, in America at least, it has the longest season. You play the most games. It's on average the longest sport in regards to like a per game basis, and there's so many of them.
Yep.
Yeah, it's weird, but the draft is coming up. Life goes on, and we're going to see what it's going to be like here in like less than 24 hours.
We sure are. We're gonna see. We're finally gonna see what this is all about.
Do you guys understand what the draft's going to be like? We'll talk about it a little bit in regards to what we can expect, but do you guys have like a clear understanding of really what this new draft is going to be like?
I think it's going to be somewhat similar to my fantasy football drafts, right? Everybody gets on Discord and talks while you look at your screen and click on names, right? It's not that different, really. That's why I can't figure out everybody's freaking out, like so worried that there's going to be glitches. I mean, how hard is it? I mean, of course, it's very important to get the right name in, but it's 2020. I mean, how hard is it to like have your guys around and like got your big board and just say the name? I mean, seriously, man.
Yeah, I mean, but think about it this way. I made a joke about this on Twitter. I think the podcast Twitter at Seahawks podcast. I made the joke that if the Minnesota Vikings can mess it up doing it live in person with like real people in front of them twice, then it could happen in a virtual world.
Well, that's true.
Because, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, but there's a lot of rumor and there's a lot of like leaks out there talking about how some teams don't have enough bandwidth. They don't know what bandwidth is. They don't know how to get more. They don't know how this potentially is going to impact them. So there are...
I want to know what teams those are. I mean, like, how can in 2020 not have anybody in your staff even? Like, just go get an intern who's like a systems engineer at the nearest university. I mean, how can you have... It's $1 billion enterprise and you're worried about your bandwidth.
That's weird.
It's weird, but I think that's also kind of like what this pandemic is exposing to people, is to show how ill-prepared they are for taking care of things virtually. Like, think about all the businesses that you would think on paper in a perfect world, the transition from going from the office to working online would be seamless. We're not talking about like restaurants or like a retail store. We're talking about like a place that like sells digital stuff. Not everyone can make that transition because people are weird. And sports people are super weird.
Why don't they just use Yahoo? Like the infrastructure is there. We do it every year for fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. I said it as a joke, but it's really isn't that different. I mean, your own team's infrastructure, I guess, has to be slightly better because you have like John and Pete need to be able to talk, and they need to be able to talk to like the head of the scouting department. There's probably like 10 people they need to be able to talk to easily. But again, I do that almost every night these nights. I mean, I have board game night with Discord every night, and it works out every night. Like, how hard is it?
Right.
No, I definitely agree that there's not really a reasonable excuse for it. But I'm looking forward almost to the spectacle of what's going to go wrong as much as the draft.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
I was reading even yesterday. I partly read an article about John Schneider having two walls taken down in his house so that he can get better signal, and that he has 25 screens up. And I'm like, what? Like, wait,
Yeah.
what does he think the draft is?
Yeah.
Like, and like, dude, if you had to like do, he's staying in his house. The whole point of doing this is social distancing, but you brought in people to take down two walls. It's a little bit counterproductive there.
Well, maybe the
I
idea is that he's not
definitely,
bringing in 10 people. It's like a crew of 9. Just
yeah, I
getting
guess. I
under
mean,
that threshold.
can you imagine like taking down two walls in your house to get better signal for a 3-day draft?
Yeah. So here's the weird thing, and this is something that I'm sure you don't see in your part of the world, Ross. But chicken wire is a commonly used like container for walls. So like rather than using like just drywall and wood and all that kind of stuff, people use chicken wire. And chicken wire is apparently one of the most notorious impactors to Wi-Fi signals. So if you're behind a wall and you've got bad wall insulation or whatever in there, it could totally mess it up. It's not saying that that's why John did that, but it's
What's chicken
something
wire
that.
made out of?
What's that?
What's chicken wire made out of?
It's
Like
just
lead?
metal. But I think the way that it's constructed, it just messes up with. And it could be that's just old Wi-Fi. I really don't know.
Um,
Just spitballing here.
I mean, I have two dead areas in my own where I live. I don't know why. My kitchen and my living room. My kitchen has a vague signal dampener, but then I have about a 1 yard by 1 yard area in my dining room that completely kills the signal as well. And I can't figure out why. It's not next to a wall even. It's just, but I know it's there. And every time I walk through it, my signal dies. Anyway,
That's weird.
moving on.
It's finally here. The first virtual NFL draft will be held Thursday through Saturday. Rumors have been swirling around for weeks, and final roster changes are being made. The Seahawks will have 7 total picks going into the draft, but we all know that John refuses to leave with at least 8 picks. The front office has averaged 9.7 draft picks over the past 10 years. Of those 97 players drafted, 10 players have had 32 Pro Bowl appearances and 20 All-Pro nominations. Some will end up in the Hall of Fame, and a lot of them we've never even heard of again. Boy Scout says let's get 12 picks. That would be perfect. I agree. This also, of that 97, that doesn't include players that the Seahawks have acquired through trade and free agency that have also represented the team. This is a Hawkscast podcast brought to you by the Hawkscast Forum. And gentlemen, let's get into topic number 1. Let's go right away. And Ross, I want to know, are you ready for another predictable, unpredictable Pete and John draft?
I mean, as best you can get ready for it. I'm ready. I've mapped out where I think the trade ups and the trade downs are going to be. And, but, that's the thing. If you're not surprised, you're not paying attention. You should be surprised. And there's going to be surprises. And, I mean, not just with where we move, it's also going to be how he picks. And so I'm expecting, I spent quite a bit of time putting together my own draft this year, my own mocks. I've started doing that every year now. And I know it's all going to be meaningless because John Schneider lives on a different world. And he's playing checkers while I play chess. Maybe checkers. So, it's all right. But I mean, that's part of the fun of it for me. Some people get mad and like are really upset, or we like kind of keep track of how many of their picks are exactly the same. But I kind of do it as a mental exercise just to get myself familiar with what's happening. And I want to know about who's being picked. Because I know, like I said, John Schneider is going to pick how he picks, and it's not going to make anything. There's no way of predicting it.
Right.
There's no way to know.
Zeb, what about you? You're probably a little bit like me, where I know you're not a big college football guy, so like people going, unless they've been talked about all year long, probably not on your radar, but how does that play into the predictability or unpredictability of John and Pete?
Well, yeah. As to the college players, I think there's about 4 this year whose names I know. It may be the worst yet, just because of how everything's been so crazy, and our brains just aren't necessarily as in tune as they typically would be for this kind of stuff. I think it's funny that these drafts have become like predictably unpredictable or unpredictably predictable. I don't know. Like we know what's going to happen. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we know what they're going to do, right?
Right.
They do it every time. So, this feels like a year where I would like to see them use some of those higher round picks for just try to get an impact player or two, somebody that we. It's hard to say. I don't know, because then you look at a guy like when they've done that, you get a guy like McDowell who ends up never even playing it down. So it's obviously all a crapshoot. I'd like to see them draft somebody in the first round that can come in and instantly impact, though. I think that would.
We have 2 second-round picks. Would you be willing to give up one of those second-round picks to move up in the first round? Because one of the reasons they always trade down is this is going to be another year where like they probably have like 17 or 18 players that they give a true first-round pick to, or first-round value to. They don't feel like it's worth it. Would you want to move up?
I would be so happy to see them move up and do something like that. It would be so much fun.
Earlier in the offseason,
they just don't do it.
I mean, they do move up. They don't move up in the first round. They tend to they do move up.
Right. That's what I mean, though. In the first round, like imagine if they jumped up somehow to like 13 or 14 to get a guy like that would be really exciting, right?
Like 13 is not doable because that's 49ers, but like around 18.
Yeah, I mean arbitrary number, but
11. Yeah, there are places like they could move up, and I kind of thought earlier this offseason this might be year they do that, because they've got a pretty solid roster, and you think at some point you get to the point where you don't need the numbers, you want the quality, right?
Right, exactly.
But then I started thinking about the total number of holes we still have, and I thought, oh, yeah. But it would be cool. Like, it would be cool to, like, we'd all be super excited, like, while we're sitting around thinking it's still the dead time, and all of a sudden when it gets to, like, the Jets at 11, they go, Jets, trade to Seattle. And we're like, what?
Yeah.
Seahawks Twitter would go nuts. And then they'd pick some center, and we'd all be like, they'd pick a center from like an NCAA team.
And I mean, I think that's the thing that I think for certain there's that certain fan out there that really does think that they are as smart as professional scouts, or that they understand concepts as good as professionals. Like they think because whether they've got a following online or they have a podcast or they just have some kind of measure or benchmark that they think they hit, that their information as quality as other people. And I'm not talking about anyone specific. I'm just talking about like generally like drafters and like mockers all over the US that watch this sport as we do. They feel that because they've done the research that it is as valid or as warranted. But the problem is the Seahawks just they think so uniquely about concepts of players' construct and what they're looking for. It's so much different from any other team in the league. I think that's what makes it so hard, because there's a certain aspect where it is really consistent, the kind of corners that they're looking for, the kind of safeties they're looking for, the kind of defensive people they're looking for. They're not looking for one person to do just one trick. They kind of want a balance to a degree. The offensive linemen they keep going after. Outside, like I can't think of one player that unanimously everyone said, oh, this guy is going to be a star. And obviously it's really hard when you're drafting at the tail end of the first round or drafting in the middle of the second round. It's really hard to find a guy that's going to be a clear-cut star. But I can't think of a player that they've drafted that everyone said, oh, this guy's going to be great. This guy's going to be a stud. I mean, you have to go back to Earl Thomas.
Yeah, pretty much. That's their highest pick they've ever done, too, so...
Yeah, Walter Okung and Russell Okung and Earl Thomas in their first year when they had 2 first-round picks. That's just kind of like the nature of how they've constructed this team, and I really don't see them ever breaking away because the results have been positive. The results have been good and consistent. and it helps them create a competitive team. So I don't see Pete and John breaking away from their boring predictability to some degree. But what we can all expect is that there's going to be a move in there that we did not expect. Like, I definitely did not anticipate that the Seahawks are going to get a guy like DK Metcalf in the second round. Like, that was a big surprise. Not because I thought he was a bad player, but I didn't know that we would get a big-bodied, speedy wide receiver in the draft.
Man, I so much did not want him.
But that's the thing. That's what's so funny about it is, like, so many people passed on him that needed a wide receiver.
Yep. I mean, it's funny because it's like you're saying. I mean, on the one hand, I get what you're saying when you say all the mockers out there and all the whatever don't like. They think they know what they're talking about, but they don't. But you know what? The draft also proves the GMs themselves sometimes don't really know what's going on. Like Metcalf was probably the second best like rookie wide receiver last year. Maybe not in production. I think he was third or fourth, but overall from what you'd want, and he's got the biggest potential, perhaps.
He broke a rookie record.
Yeah. So it's a lot of it's such a crapshoot, and you just kind of hope that you gotta put together your board and not doubt yourself and just trust your board and go for it.
Yeah,
Seahawks do that, and people. It's funny because Seahawks Twitter, especially Seahawks draft mockers, they're trying to break the code. There's a million sites out there that have like Seahawks only draft from this height to this height and this arm length to this arm, and like the people who do that, they're still not right. So. There's like a secret. It's like Colonel Sanders' secret recipe with chicken. The Seahawks have like their secret recipe for success with each position, and they know what they're looking for. And it's funny because I think it changes year to year, and that's where some of the mock drafters go wrong, and they get frustrated. Is the recipe doesn't? It's not the same. They don't have one classic recipe from after the Civil War like Colonel Sanders.
Right.
It's a different recipe slightly every year. They modify it. They go back. They self-scout. And then what they need is a little bit different, I think.
Agreed. All right, let's bust on because we got a big topic we're going to hit here in a second. But topic number 2, Zeb, I want to know, do you think that players acquired for draft picks count towards a team's draft haul? For example, there's a lot of picks that we spent from the 2020 draft here. We spent a third-round pick to get Jadeveon Clowney last year. We acquired a fifth-round pick for Nick Vannett from Pittsburgh. We then moved that to Washington this offseason for cornerback Quentin Dunbar. We spent our fifth-round pick to Detroit for safety Quandre Diggs. We spent a sixth-round pick last year to pick up John Ursula on our team this last year. And we spent our seventh-round pick this year to pick up Jacob Hollister last year. Is that fair to use that as draft capital and draft grades and all those other things?
I mean, yes and no. It kind of depends on exactly what you're trying to analyze or what you're trying to judge. Like when you're looking at a team's body of work as far as assembling a team and how they use the draft to do that, then obviously it makes sense to include anything they got out of a draft pick. But if you're looking at how a team, look how they are at judging college players and picking and getting guys as rookies, and what they can do is to come in as rookies, and when you're kind of comparing them against other teams, it's a little bit different. But I think overall, I don't know that it necessarily counts as part of their draft grade, but overall, yeah, I mean, if you're able to take a third-round pick and turn it into a veteran player who comes in and makes a big impact on your team, obviously it counts, So, and the opposite side of that is when you get a guy like Sheldon Richardson, that's almost a waste of a pick, and looking like Jadeveon Clowney may be a similar situation. Them kind of guys, when you're not getting the return you want for something. So, I don't know that it counts as the draft grade, but obviously, overall, you have to look at it as part of what they did with the picks that they had.
Yeah. Ross, what about you? Like, do you think that there is a difference when you try and grade just draft alone versus off-season altogether?
I mean, you can make a case either way, and it depends on your goal, like Zeb said. If you're writing for the USA Today and you're talking about the Seahawks draft, I mean, you'd be a little bit like negligent to not mention some of it. But at the same time, if you're going to do that and you're going to include that part of the grade, you have to include the entire context. And you can't just say that, the third rounder became Clowney. You're like, wow, Clowney's better than any third rounder you could ever get. That's way better, because when you draft somebody, you get them for 4 or 5 years of control, and you get them at a really, really low price. So it's not merely a matter, okay, well, that became that player for last year. I mean, you have to look at the whole context to see if it's worth it too. Clowney's better than a third rounder, but we also had to pay more for Clowney last year. Plus, like Zeb just pointed out, it looks like we may only get him for a year. But then the further context to that is, depending if we sign somewhere else for how much, we're going to get a compensatory pick, which we kind of assumed would be a fourth rounder, but may end up being a fifth. There are picks, I think it's closer that you can almost say it's almost straight across. Like Hollister for a 7th. We have him on his rookie year. We're still going to get him for 4 years, I think. Right?
I think he's got 2 more years, because he was practice scout the previous year.
Sorry, he played 2 years in New England. So yeah, we still get him. So you still get Hollister, who was our third leading receiver last year, for a 7th round pick this year. So it's still worth it. It's still a great deal. But I mean, again, I think you can include it when you're evaluating the draft, but it makes it really, really complicated, because it becomes a lot more. There's a lot more context. How long do you have them? How much do you have to pay for them? And some things are just so abstract, I think you almost can't. I mean, our trade for Diggs, that guy's, you're going to have to either give him more money to keep him to stay, and you only get him for 2 years, and it gets, that kind of thing gets really complicated. But again, if you're writing an article to make your audience understand what's happening, you got to bring it up. But I think it's also like a lazy media trick to just completely consider the same thing.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it's something you have to consider and talk about. But I don't think it's straight across, because you don't get the full benefit of having just drafted somebody normally.
Right. So what I'm going to do, and I think both of you are correct. I don't really disagree with anything. What I'm going to say is, I think that you have to definitively value the acquisition of these players with draft capital, because really that's, I think, the way that John and Pete look at the draft. Every pick has a value, and they keep weighing, is this player and the opportunity to draft them more valuable than getting more players, more control, or getting a vet? And I think that's where the Seahawks are really unique, because other teams make trades, other teams get fleeced. Like, you look at what happened to Houston. Houston gave up so many of their players, and I'm really not sure what they're getting for it. You look at, they lost Dwayne Brown, they lost Jadeveon Clowney, they lost DeAndre Hopkins. Pretty sure that they're going to lose Deshaun Watson for, honestly, a 6-pack at this point, because what do they have to lose? Obviously not him, because they're going to trade him for nothing. But the way that Pete and John construct their roster, and the way that they look at the draft and they look at the draft picks, it's all about value and commodity. And they keep looking at that more so uniquely than other teams, which is why they have all of these trades. If you look at the construct of the roster, it is not dependent on just the draft, just free agency, or just trades. It's like this super meld of all of these things. And they have their core components, but like you were saying, Ross, just because you get a guy for a 5th-round pick, it doesn't mean that you got him on their rookie deal and you get them for that full amount of time. You have to give up stuff. Sheldon Richardson, Jadeveon Clowney is like the 2 worst examples, being one and done and not really getting the stats that you needed out of them to really kind of justify those picks. But I think it is something that you have to consider, because it's draft capital. Like, it's not like you just lost value in the draft. You just chose to say, I'm going to go a different route. I'm going to get this player. So I think you have to include it, but I think it is tricky. It's nuanced, and you kind of have to construct almost before you start spitting it out. What am I trying to prove at this point? And I think for John and Pete, it's saying they use it in a much smarter way than most other teams would. And that's why they're able to make all of these trades and all of these moves and get players that, for the most part, people are kind of surprised and amazed. Like the fact that they got Jadeveon Clowney, Quentin Dunbar, and Quandre Diggs all in a matter of 4 months, 6 months. It's pretty crazy.
It
The
is.
Clowney one blew me away. I mean, to be honest,
Well, we all
Clowney
thought
doesn't
that we were
seem
going to
like
have to give
somebody
up a
who-
second rounder for it, and we'd have to pick up all of his contract, both of which did not happen.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how you can explain that if you're a Houston fan.
I mean, they have to, like, if you're a Houston fan, you have to sort of go steady with the idea of, like, addition by subtraction. You have to really deeply convince yourself that somehow it's better not to have superstars right now because you're going to get superstars that would buy into the program or something. I don't know, man. Because, yeah, if you look at, like, the talent exodus in Houston over the past year, it's extreme.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
really extreme.
as good of a good a player as Deshaun Watson is, and I do think he is amazing. You know, he won a playoff game, so it's not like he's just some scrub. But you can't just lose talent like that. Like the Seahawks suffered by losing talent like Doug Baldwin. Like that was a tangible thing that Seattle lost last year. You can't just say like, "Oh yeah, we'll replace that. We'll have a different thing." It's like, no, that's not. It's
Yeah, dude, but they got Kenny Stills. So, I mean, they're set. They
okay.
have the
I
guy
can
who's
see
always-
that's true.
guy-
Kenny Stills is he's burning people up.
Who's their other wide receiver who's always hurt?
I know because I draft him and then like I drop him in and out of the year. I know who you're
Tony
talking
likes
about.
him a lot. Tony gets him a lot. I stopped getting him because he burns me all the time.
He's one of those guys that catches like 3 touchdowns in a game and then like doesn't do anything for like 5 weeks.
Right, for like 6 weeks, he's like out with a sprained ego or something.
Yeah, yeah. Those
he's
guys
so-
are all over the place.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. Like, if you're a Houston fan, you're just on the ledge constantly.
For sure.
Deshaun Watson sounds like he's sort of on the ledge right now. Once they traded Hopkins.
Well, I think it just came out of nowhere. Like, and the rumor as to why he was traded away is even more crazy.
Yeah. No, on topic, real quick. I do believe that it is fair to judge the Seahawks in particular on draft picks, like the players that they actually pick. Let's look at how the Seahawks scout and measure the college players that they decide to draft outside of whatever they're able to do with the draft picks. You know what I mean? Because post 2012, there was quite a few drafts in a row that were very, very, very suspect as to exactly what they
dude, suspect's such a generous word. I think there's just bad drafts. They had like a 3-year stretch where they didn't get talent that meant they were getting something back. Like they had players, but no one was great. You know, when Luke Wilson is like one of your star players out of that draft, that's a problem.
right.
Oh, some respect for Luke, please.
I'm saying
How
Luke
can
Wilson
Wilson
as
do
like
that
a
with-
5th-round draft pick, and he's like the best player out of your draft that year. That's really bad on the front office.
Yeah.
Cam Chancellor was a 5th rounder, I think.
Yeah, but he was
Right.
also in the same draft with like other guys. Like he was in the Earl Thomas, Russell Okung draft. So
That draft was amazing. So
That's one of those, like, that goes down in legends.
that was the one parting gift that Tim Ruskell did really well. We traded a 2nd-round pick in the previous year for Denver's 1st-round pick, and that ended up being Earl Thomas, I believe.
yeah.
I think Earl's was ours. I think it was the other one. So
Russell Okung was the higher
Because
pick.
the year before, because Earl Thomas was like number 11 or something, and we sucked the year before, so that would have been him.
Yeah, that was the 5 and 11 year that Jim Mora wanted like credit for improving by 1 game. From 4 and 12 to 5 and 11, guys, we did it.
In just 1 year, though.
Just 1 year.
Just 25% improvement. That's impressive.
It is.
All
By
right.
any measure.
Let's move on to the meat and potatoes of the show today. We want to talk about topic number 3. This is the Hawkscast Corner. This is the Hawkscast 2020 mock draft with and without trades. So, Ross, if for those of you that haven't, go to hawkscast.com. There is 2 great topics out there. Ross, why don't you just take us away? Talk to us about what it's like to try and mock the Seahawks.
It's fun. I mean, it's fun. It's interesting because it's educational. You start with the basics, and I cheat a little bit. There's a lot of people out there who do this year round, and so I don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people out there going to tell you like some starting names to go with, or not names, but maybe some starting information. At each position, the Seahawks have, like I said earlier, you can go too far with it, but there are sea hockey type players with certain physical characteristics. You can start with those to get like a sort of base, and then you have to sort of read about them and watch them, and you got to look for like the people that seem like that attracts or is attractive to John Schneider and Pete Carroll, the people who have the right attitude. They like people who've gone through challenges in their life and have overcome them, and they like that. It's as much about the attitude after you find the basic physical characteristics as anything else. Um and then it's some of it, and then eventually it becomes a slog, and eventually sometimes it's a little bit frustrating. You line up where you think people are going to fall with where they got the picks, and what, one of the hardest things to do is being honest with yourself, because while you're evaluating, you start to fall in love with certain players, and you really really want them, and you really really like them, but then you go to fill in the numbers of where you think they're going to draft, and you just can't work out for that player to be available there, or you can't justify picking that early, or you think it's going to be too late. And so it's a really really good mental exercise to go through, as far as researching things, being honest with yourself, kind of trying to see the world from other people's point of view. Because if you're trying to make a mock with what you think you do, that's going to be quite different from when you're trying to make an accurate. I try to produce something that I think will give people an idea of how it'll go. I don't expect the names to be all correct or even partly correct. I think last year I had one exactly right and five that I had on my list of possibles. I didn't choose them ultimately, but I felt still, satisfied they were in the on my paper anyway. But anyways, it's a great exercise, and it's a lot of fun to do. A little frustrating at times, but yeah, it's cool. And then once it comes to the real draft, you feel like Friday morning, Thursday night for you guys is gonna have a bit more meaning when you start hearing these names come off the board, and like you've evaluated them, or you know something about them. Makes the draft actually a lot more meaningful as well. So it's a hard process though sometimes.
Before I get into asking Ross a couple questions, Zeb, have you ever tried to do a mock draft for any team, whether just for fun or actually the Seahawks or anything like that?
I don't think so. No, I've never just been knowledgeable enough about college game and the players coming out to be able to put something like that together. I've tried to guess first round picks before for us and stuff like that, but I don't think I've ever even gotten that right. So
I think I've done it once, and I did it back in like mid 2000s. And this is like when it was Mike Holmgren was still GMing, so that was a unique experience. I got like nothing right. The only players I knew were the only people that I'd seen on TV. So obviously there was like a whole world of people that I had no clue about. So I wanna give credit out there to the mockers to try and do this. To Ross, again, go to hawkscast.com. There's a bunch of great comments and topics and threads on this, so do check it out. Ross, I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of the process, because you mentioned that one of the things that you have to do is you kind of have to separate yourself from what you want versus what you think like the team wants. And one of the things that I noticed is you have one draft where they turn their 7 picks into 11 picks, and then you have one draft where obviously they made no trades. Obviously, that's probably never going to happen under this current front office. But the only thing that you have at least consistent in your draft is in your mock with multiple trades, and they have 11 picks. You have them taking wide receiver Isaiah Hodgins in the 150th pick overall, and then you have them in your no trade mock going 214th overall to the Seahawks again. Your comments are obviously the same, but what do you think that is where you have a situation, and I'm saying this is very realistic, I believe, where in one draft this player goes super high, nearly 2 rounds higher, versus a draft where he's going in the late 6th round?
So yeah, there's quite a few differences in the two. When I did the straight across one, so everybody knows that this is like, I mean, it's been talked about since I feel like the middle of last college season. Everybody knows that this year is the year for wide receivers. There's wide receiver depth everywhere. There's tons of wide receivers to get. Um, that means it can go kind of one of two ways. It means some teams might feel like they can wait to get them because you can get a quality wide receiver later on. But it also can mean that some people still want to go early and take, this is the year they're going to stock up, and they could go multiple wide receiver this year. So when I was doing the no trades one, I ended up mocking a lot of. It made sense as I was putting that together for a lot of teams to pick a lot of wide receivers early. When I was doing the one with trades, and so I felt like the Seahawks will really like this guy, and it's a good fit for the team, and so I felt like they would have to pick him up that early. It's still probably early for him, but I thought that by that time I'd actually, when I reevaluated for this one, he seemed even more of a fit for them, and it just seemed like a person that they often do this, right? They'll pick somebody that everybody else has rated as a 7th or UDFA, and they'll pick him in the 5th or the 6th or whatever. And it just seemed like he's the kind of guy they could do that for.
Right.
The other one, that just didn't come up, and there wasn't as much of there were enough players that they could still, if they want to add a wide receiver late, there were still enough that were like going to be options. Whereas like when I did this one, it just looked like they were going to run options, and so they would move up, or not necessarily move up, but take him earlier maybe than they might have otherwise. And that's why there's some disparity there.
No, I totally get that.
Once, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Once, the other weird thing you notice, like when you try to do mocks and you compare it to like past real drafts, is if a player position gets picked like 2 out of 3 picks, it often starts sort of panic buying if it was Wall Street. So you'll see in my mocks, for example, when I did the overall NFL draft, I see something like 6 offensive tackles taken because there's so much need for offensive tackles this year, and there's only certain level of tier 1s, and it creates like a run on position. It creates a position on offensive tackle, it creates a run on wide receivers. That's probably going to happen as well. And so people who really, really want to get one have to pick earlier than they think. The wide receiver this year, I can see the whole run on and people having to pick them early, even though there's a whole bunch. It just means people are like kind of in a hurry to get them. Or it could have the opposite effect. It could be that people relax and feel like, hey, I can wait 2 or 3 rounds to get my wide receiver and still get a good one. I can see it going either way.
I think
because there's going to be a team last thing. Because there's going to be a team also who thinks they can completely remake their wide receiver core, like drafting 2 dynamic wide receivers like 1st and 2nd round, and all of a sudden your team looks completely different.
Yeah. The one thing that I wanted to talk about, the one thing that is consistent in both of these mocks, with and without trades, is that the positions that you target, and this is where I feel the most comfortable kind of like projecting and talking about like, hey, these are positions that I think the Seahawks should take. And what is consistent in both of your drafts is wide receiver, corner, and edge. Not a lot of offensive linemen. In your draft with trades, there is 2 offensive linemen, but it's mostly edge, tackles, corners, safety help, and wide receiver. Those are the areas that I do think that the Seahawks really should address. One, with the offensive linemen, they've got 18 on their roster right now. There's no way they're going to leave camp with more than 10 if a season starts. But tell me a little bit more about not only the fact that that's been a focus, but do you feel that that's an area which the Seahawks need to address? And is that your thoughts as well? If you could just pick positions, what would you want to see the Seahawks address?
Are you asking me right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like they've decided that O-line isn't going to be a focus in the draft. I didn't think running back would be a position of need, but I guess it is. It could potentially be, so it wouldn't surprise me to see them take a running back fairly high. I don't see them going super hard at wide receiver, but it's possible. And then obviously an edge rusher, D line in general, and probably even linebacker look like places they're going to want to look. I don't know that I can put those positions into an order of need, but I think that's where the focus is probably going to be, and I'll be 100% wrong.
It's funny because
yeah,
I don't know, like you see, like Zeb says, I don't really feel wide receivers a huge need, but you balance it out with like opportunity as well. Maybe you don't need it, but if there's going to be somebody great there that can impact, you could still pick them. That's why in the one with trades, I put in as our fourth pick a wide receiver, and that's Laviska Shenault. He could be sort of the equivalent of DK Metcalf this year. He's fallen way, way, way down. I may have had him dropped too far. I may have gone too far with him. I might have fallen victim to some wishful thinking, but he's fallen way down because he's had some problems. I mean, part of it, like, it's not his fault. He had some really, really bad quarterback play. You're watching this film and like he's getting open, and the stats are never going to reflect it because just bad quarterback play. He also was injured. He made some weird decision as to, like, he after the combine he decided to have sports hernia surgery, which is weird. The rumors are that he interviewed really badly. But I think the Seahawks, if they like him, they can look past that. They did with DK Metcalf. Everybody jokes and like thinks it's so funny that DK Metcalf took his like shirt off during the interview, and Pete Carroll took his shirt off too and make it a joke. But he actually, and everybody ignored this, Pete Carroll actually talked about how the fact that he didn't like that. He was put off by the fact that he did that. It's just that it's too much of a talent to ignore. So could be in that situation. So that's why I put the wide receiver in there. Back to the actual question, I put on Seahawks' philosophy is generally like they attack hardcore the positions they need, and they're not subtle at all. Like last year, they felt they needed a wide receiver, and they took 3 of them. Right.
Right.
Some teams try to, like, if it means they're attacking a position, they take 2 of those, but they try to kind of balance. They want the crapshoot and the opportunity to get talented at any position because you never know who's going to show up. So the Seahawks don't do that. When they know what they want, they address everything. They do a really good job of addressing one of their needs usually before the draft. And this year, again, not subtle. They've signed 18 offensive linemen. So that means, yeah, they're not going to take, or they're going to take 1 or 2 really late if they have enough picks. What they need is edge. This is really bad timing for them because this is the worst year in years to take an edge rusher. Last year, when I was doing the mock, I think I ended up projecting 6 in the first round, and they were quality edge rushers. And this year, there's like 2 or 3, and one of them I don't like. Yetter Gross Matos, despite his cool name. I don't like him, and I don't think even like, and everybody projected the Seahawks at 27 stink put in taking him, but I don't think he'll stay there just because edge. I mean, I don't like him, and I couldn't be objective, and I left him off first round entirely. I think I have to go back and look, but he could actually go really, really early just because there's teams every year people need edge, and he's one of the few around, so he could go really early. But I don't. There's very, very pure edge rushers. You're gonna almost have to take people you can manufacture. Like the great pass rushers in the draft, they tend to more be like linebackers who you could put at defensive end for like third down.
Right.
But other than that, you're gonna struggle to get them on the field because they're like they're like a Sam.
Right.
And so you're gonna to get edge out of this draft, you're gonna have to pick people who are gonna basically take it as a part-time. Very much a part-time player. So, yeah. So that's where I was at with that. But I do have him taking a bunch just to kind of throw a bunch at the wall and see what sticks kind of approach, right?
Yeah. And
I was really frustrated because I wanted to do that last year. Last year, Crosby in the 5th or 6th, and that's actually where the Raiders eventually took him, and he had like 8 sacks last year and only playing the second half of the year.
Yeah.
So,
I think the thing, and I think the thing that I find to be at least most impressive about this is the level of objectivity that you need. You kind of have to almost be a robot, because like you mentioned earlier, and we were talking about it, it's like if there's a run on a position or if there's a run on these types of players, it can really cascade. We've all played fantasy football and we've all seen like, oh, the tight end started going or the quarterback started going. Oh, all the wide receivers are going. Like we've all been in those situations, and there have been times where people, when you're doing these fantasy drafts, where you say, oh crap, I don't have this position, but if I don't draft this person now, I'm gonna lose out and not get anybody. I feel like there's still that human aspect of football that GMs fall into, especially the ones that are not as like strong and resolved, and maybe it's like a personal thing, but I never feel like the Seahawks are caught up in the draft moment, like, oh, we're going to take this position because if we don't take this guy now, we're not going to get this position until this round, and it's just not worth it. Like, they always seem very determined. Doesn't mean that it always pans out to their benefit, but I never see like the Seahawks are like part of a wave of positions getting drafted because there's a risk or worry that all of a sudden they're going to run out.
I think a lot of that, I mean, maybe it's me projecting, but I feel a lot of that's related to the relationship between John Schneider and Pete Carroll. Like, they obviously have ton of respect for each other. They work really, really well to each other. So if one of them does get, I don't want to call it panicky, but if one of them does start, getting antsy about something, I feel like they've got a really good counter, sitting at the table with them, or in this case, online with them this year, and that can talk him off the ledge or talk him back to sanity.
I think
because I can see occasionally where like Pete Carroll especially might be given to, gosh, we got to get our guy, and John's trying to go, hey man, Pete, just chill, man, we're gonna get our guy.
I mean, the perfect example of that is Russell Wilson. Pete wanted to take him in the second round, and John was like, no, we need to get this guy from Utah named Bobby. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, you're right. That is a perfect. Just they're just such a good team that I kind of worry. People talk about who should get the credit here or who gets the credit. I don't think either of them has the success they've had without the other. They need each other. I think they're a set.
Yeah, and I think this is the reason why they've been the same duo for 10 drafts going on the 11th. So
yeah.
Final thoughts on the mock draft. Final thoughts on what can we expect? Like what would be the one surprise you would allow yourself for a Pete and John draft?
I could see them freaking us all out and taking like a wide receiver at 27, just going like, because that's the one thing they have been vulnerable to. Pete Carroll and I think John Schneider, because of their philosophy, what their offense is supposed to look like, they are vulnerable to taking wide receivers out of position or going again. Pete, even Percy Harvin, that weird trade for Percy Harvin, like they always think they need like the one more wide receiver. So I could see them taking one at 27 and freaking us all out.
I mean, Zeb, I want to hear your thoughts before I chime in here real quick.
I don't know. I kind of have this feeling that they're looking for a running back early, but we'll see.
They could. Jonathan Taylor wants to play for them.
Yeah. I mean, that's the name. I didn't want to say it, but
you can say it. You can say it.
Jonathan Taylor touchdown.
But there's also a guy called Zach, probably about third, that they've interviewed and they've had a lot of contact with. That's the other thing. When you do the research for us, you find out interesting things behind the scenes, like how many players they've actually brought in for interviews, or this year that they've done like Skype sessions with. And that's actually a big. That's why in my one with, I hadn't actually thought of much about Ross, and same first name as me. I hadn't really thought much about like Ross Blacklock, but then his name shows up everywhere in Seahawks notes, and you're like, okay, well, there's smoke, there's probably some fire, so we could go there.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Jonathan Taylor, that Zach Moss guy's got a ton of contact with them, like with Skype sessions, so that could be a running back as well. They go for.
I think the surprise that I would allow the Seahawks to get me with is if they draft a lot of offensive linemen. Like if it's a case where like, oh wow, we have this guy as like a first round pick, but he's here sitting with us at the end of the second round, or this is a Seahawks offensive lineman of the future. I think that would be the one surprise, even though they have 18 on the roster.
They could do that. They could there's a
But
scenario where that
but that's
plays
a
out.
value proposition, right? It's not them. I wouldn't say they would do it in the first round, but if in like the third, fourth, fifth round, if there's a guy that they have like a high value on, and teams are not taking him because he's not a Seahawks offensive lineman, I could see them taking their 19th offensive lineman and it coming through the draft. But that would be a surprise, I think.
What they could do, there's a lot of teams, like I said, who need a tackle, and there's only 4 top tier tackles, and there's like 3 or 4 second tier. If you find that tackle you believe in, and they draft their tackles and alignment slightly different, they could, for example, do something like where they pick in the late second round a tackle they think is still good, and do it by trading away Dwayne Brown, or trade. They could trade away some of these offensive linemen they've now put under contract for reasonable amounts. All those 18 guys that they've signed, I mean, Dwayne Brown's contract is quite big, but a lot of them are really reasonable.
Oh, yeah.
So if you find teams out there that got disappointed or didn't get their guy, and you know they didn't get their guy, you can now turn around and trade. I mean, it's kind of mean to these people who thought they were signing in Seattle.
Right.
But once they're under contract, they're under contract. And you can turn around. If you find a guy you like better or just as much, you can get him. You can get him cheaper and under control for 4 years. You could turn around and trade away, Benny or.
Yeah. I would say that's more likely in the preseason and during training camp than in the draft, but I think it's definitely something worth exploring. I would probably put more money on Justin Britt being traded away than Dwayne Brown, even though Dwayne Brown both of them are in their last year of their deal.
Britt's contract for his level of play makes that really dubious. But, I mean, it'd be cool. I'd love if somebody would give us like a 4th and take that contract off our hands.
And it could be something with it that the Texans did, where you trade him away, get a draft pick, but you eat a little bit of that salary because you have the flexibility and the other team maybe doesn't.
I don't think we can do that. We don't have any money.
We have about 12, I think, and about 8 of that is going to be actual availability. 4 of it, half of that's for rookies, other 2 will be for injury. But yeah, I think they're not in a lot of position to play around with money for sure.
Yeah, I'm still holding out for like a last minute Clowney deal.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I know. I know, and I know they've kind of moved on even. Stranger things have happened. If he actually ends up thinking he's going to have to bet on himself and he sees who Seattle drafts, he could be like, okay, this is the year I can get some better stats.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's about. Like, everybody's basically saying, I'm not going to give you that money because you had 3 sacks last year. And like, even though it's really short-sighted and whatever, and it's not really fair. I mean, there are 2 particular games last year we won that we would not have won without Clowney.
For sure.
But that's not how you're getting evaluated, unfortunately. It's not fair, but that's life.
Right.
So if he comes back and says, like, if you put me in a position to get the sacks, so next year I can get a better contract, I'll come back for 1 year, give me my $16 million, and that means Britt's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, the perfect counter to that is you could look at someone like Tim Tebow, who has terrible stats, terrible mechanics, does not look good as a quarterback, but he won games. So
he did. I kind of feel bad for him. Like, I don't like him. I don't like the religion on the sleeve deal. But man, like, I just wish there was some more variety of GM types out there. Like play with the guy who just wins games. Use him. Like, I felt like he got like such a raw deal. Like, I don't like him. Whatever. But like you said, he won games. Like, I
think the problem is people don't trust players to win ugly. That's the problem. Like, you look at these past 3 years, anytime Seahawks won ugly, fans lost their shit. And that's the way that teams work. That's the way fans work. That's the way GMs work. They don't want to win ugly. They want to win pretty. They want to put points up. They want to look like amazing.
Yeah. True.
And it's just so hard.
Everybody wants to be the Rams from 2 years ago.
Right, and look where the Rams are right now.
Exactly.
All right.
You guys think we're going to get a trade in for Yannick?
No, apparently there's a trade already happening between the Raiders and the Jags.
It says the Raiders and the Jags are apparently close, but I don't know if it's official. I don't think anything official has happened.
I think they're going to have to sign. To be honest, I didn't put this in the mock I didn't really know the format, but I think what they're gonna have to do is gonna have to get Everson Griffin. There's just
He's
not much
available, and he doesn't want to play in Minnesota, so we'll see.
because there's just nothing available at edge. They can't go into the year as they did this year, or as they did last year, and they can't go in as is, and they can't go. I mean, yeah, if they don't get Clowney somehow, they're gonna have to go get Everson Griffin.
I remember Clowney didn't sign until right before week 1,
yeah,
or traded.
yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
so
I just think you have to get him.
Do you guys want to hear some Matty Brown rumors?
Hit us.
Just hot takes, right? Quick ones. Clowney isn't dead. I mean, I think we all know he's alive and well, but it's not over.
I think a couple of weeks ago, people the thought was that window's closed, and I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either.
I agree.
He says that there is an option to trade for Yannick depending on how the board falls. Obviously, assuming that the Raiders don't make it happen tonight, right?
Yeah, I think that's not going to happen. I don't think. I think if they really like that, trigger on it, to be honest.
Maddie says that the Seahawks have 7 guys in round 1 who they'd stay at 27 for.
But none of them will be there.
Right. It's like, well, if the top 3 guys are still on the board, I guess we'll take them.
Available, put.
Hey,
well, yeah.
you never know.
I mean, honestly, like, let's say there is just some amazing, like, blue chip 5-star, however you want to call it, player available at 27. The Seahawks would look at that as a value proposition. Like, man, there's 20 other teams that would love to have this player. What picks could we get, not just this year, but next year, if we trade it away?
Right.
Like, that's what they would look at. Because the reason why they trade down so much and acquire is because it allows them to move up in the 2nd and 3rd round, which is where they feel there's the best value for the players they can get. Ross, you talked about that earlier. They trade up in the 2nd and 3rd round because they've got a wealth of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th round picks that teams want to move up for.
I'm trying to look through the draft, finding like the lowest player I think they'd stay put for. I think it might be Clavon Chason, the linebacker who can also rush.
Yeah.
I think that's the last player I could see them staying put for. Maybe.
What's his floor though? What's like likely the last place he'll get drafted? It's not at 27.
It's at 17, 18.
Right, so that's 10 picks.
That's the guy who like this year's format really gets hurt. Like if he'd been able to have his own pro day, that guy goes like at 12. But he didn't, so that there's just so a lot of people have him going to Dallas at 17. I have him going to Philadelphia via trade with San Francisco, Miami, blah, blah, blah. I have him going at 18, and that's probably a bit late, but I see a huge run on tackles that disrupts the whole draft.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a tackle. There's 4 of them, like I keep mentioning, and then there's a couple of people like teams are going to talk themselves into taking, like Josh Jones, that probably your second round is they get taken the first because people are going to panic because they don't have Pete Carroll and John Schneider. And that's why. So, I don't see anybody that could possibly still be around that we're willing to stay in place for. Justin Jefferson, they're not going to stay in place for a wide receiver, are they? I mean, that's one of the theories I brought up earlier. Yeah. There's a safety, there's a safety named Xavier McKinney. And he's sort of an Earl Thomas type. He can play single high and let you do anything. But the thing is, we've already got Diggs, so I don't know what to do with that dude. But maybe. Oh, you know what? I see one more potential. I am not high on him, but Patrick Queen, a linebacker. I have him going falling into 24. Not because he's not good, but like I said, I see that offensive tackle run disrupting the draft. Patrick Queen is maybe the last guy I could see them still staying put for.
Patrick Queen?
Yeah. He's kind of he's a guy. I mean, we don't have a huge need of linebacker. He's not purely a rusher. Like he's a guy you have to account for. He's a playmaker. So I could see him staying. That's the last guy. And like I said, I have him going at 24. So that's not out of reach.
Right.
So that's the last guy I could see him possibly wanting to stay put for. But who knows, man? They take they take random things at first round. So.
I would say that there's a 90% chance that the Seahawks do not draft on Thursday. They're going to wait till Friday.
I keep thinking that, and that's what common sense. But then at the same time, I keep having this nagging feeling that maybe like this year they break the trend for just halfway, just to make us all feel stupid.
Yeah, I mean it's a trend, but I think what happens is they the way that they construct their draft, the way that they talk about their board is they just say, yeah, there's like 5 guys that we think are first round talent and we would love to have them, but we're drafting at 27. They're not going to fall to us. So we don't focus on that. We focus on the guys that are valued, in this, B plus rank that we give, and they're not players that other teams are coveting. So that's who we're going for.
The other issue though is there's a lot of teams this year who want to move down, and so that's going to be.
It's one of those things that like that's what teams maybe want to say, and they want to like, kind of put that out there. But the other problem is like, just because you want to move down doesn't mean you can. There's not always a team that wants to take the player available. They're kind of like, no, I'm happy drafting at 43. I don't need to move up to 27. Like it's
right.
Not
but that's what I'm saying. Like I mean, if we don't find the right partner, because so many other people are willing to move this, even in the overall NFL mock. I mean, you won't see because it's too nerdy to look up. But a lot of the teams I had when I had to move down, there's that trade board, the famous, how many points is each position worth?
Right.
I had a lot of teams move down not get full value because there was too many teams that want to move down. I think teams moving up know that, and they're not going to offer the full value.
And that potentially plays well into what Pete and John want to do. So maybe this is the year that we see the Seahawks move from 27 to the mid-teens.
Maybe that would be exciting.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up here real quick. So we got topic number 4, and this is just the virtual draft. Zeb, what can you expect from the virtual draft, and do you think that this will inspire future drafts? Are we going to see more of this online, virtual, not in person anymore?
I don't know. I guess it depends on how much this whole thing changes society and how long that all lasts. I think that the NFL is probably going to be slow to change the way they do things. If there's nothing, if there was no circumstances like what we're dealing with, they wouldn't change anything, right? Like they've been doing it this way for years. So if next year they can go back to normal and do it the way they've always done it, they probably will. As far as what to expect, I think there's going to be I think it's going to be hard to watch. I think there's going to be a lot of. Can you hear me? Or
yep.
The screen's blank. I think there's going to be a lot of guys talking over each other and not realizing somebody else is speaking and that kind of thing. I think it's going to be probably a lot of work for the guys on the technical side of things trying to keep stuff running smoothly.
People forget that they're muted.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be from an entertainment standpoint, not as entertaining as the typical draft would be in the traditional senses, but I think from like kind of the train wreck aspect, it might be funny. I'm hoping that we don't end up with any kind of scenarios where a team claims they didn't get to do what they wanted to do or something. You know what I mean? Because that could be a real mess.
Right.
That could be a mess. But I don't know. I think it'll be. I'm very interested to see what happens, and I think there will be some technical difficulties. Obviously, hopefully not too many, but it's going to be. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Ross, what about you? This is a draft that's going to take place at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 o'clock Pacific. What time is that going to be for you?
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock in the morning?
Wait, so 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock at night. Sorry, 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock for you guys, right?
Yeah.
It's 5 o'clock, so that's going to be 1 o'clock in the afternoon for me. So
okay, not too bad.
Cool. No, it's a great time. It's going to be interesting. I sort of see it playing out, like as I joked earlier, sort of like my fantasy football drafts. I just keep going, like I just keep seeing like Mark Davis has got to take a bathroom break, so pause it, please. Like I can see stuff like because apparently that's already said that if there's any sort of issues that come up, they have the option like they can pause the draft at any time. And so I just totally see that happen. Just going like, Pete locked himself in the bathroom. We got to wait and get him out. So can you pause it for a second? Or like, oh man, I need to go get another beer. Going forward, I feel like, I mean, now we're getting to the meta, but next year they may have to be remote as well. And next year, if they have to do it remote, they'll have many more months of planning so they can, what they're missing this year. This is the reason, like, I was going to say, like, they're not going to do it remote anymore because they're missing the spectacle. They can't make money off of it, right? They can make much more money off of it when they do it the way they always do it or they have recently. But if they could turn it next year into doing it online, but they have a year to brainstorm and figure out like ways to get the fans involved and ways to do this and ways to do that, and they've got the time to, and they could make just as much money off of it, then you know what, they might like it. They might, it's a really expensive thing to do the way they do it. I mean, they make a lot of money, but they also, teams themselves have to spend a lot of money to do it.
Right.
So they could do it remote in the future, but still make money off of it. I think they would be happy to switch to that. Actually, I don't think that John Schneider, every year really needs to pack up his bags and go over to New York or LA or New Orleans or wherever they're doing it that year. So yeah, it just depends on how they monetize it, really, and it's really sad to think of it that way. But that's what it's going to come down to.
I think that's an interesting aspect, and my thought on that is that a lot of it is just trying to create content that doesn't look crappy, right? It's making it so that if you can clean it up so that the gaps between when person A and commenter B starts talking, like to minimize it and seem more seamless, that's a better experience for the audience. But that's going to be a challenge because these people have never done it outside of they've never done it remotely. It's always like, oh, I'm asking you a question, you ask me a question, maybe in like the non-draft season. But when it's the draft season, they're just yelling at each other across the table. And trying to break that habit, break that instance, I think will be really unique and really difficult. What my hope is that the draft is just kind of like, okay, like it's not exciting. It's because there's not the player aspect. You don't get to see these players get drafted that way that we traditionally see them do that. I think that will kind of suck because the stories of those are always fun. And what I hope this inspires is I hope that there is someone from NFL Films documenting what it was like to get ready for this draft so that there's a documentary that we can watch on it. Because if it's a spectacle, if it's riddled with, technical difficulties, that behind the scenes would be really interesting to see and see how can they get better at it for potentially the next year. That's what my hope is.
I 100% agree, but at the same time, given the NFL's internal culture, I don't think they want to make a documentary emphasizing how much they messed things up. Like, I just don't see them. I mean, like, anybody with a sense of humor and, self-awareness could do that, but that's not really the NFL's strong point. Although, to their credit, did you see this year that they're recording, like, the commissioner usually goes up and gets booed, right? So they paired up with somebody to have, like, they're recording fan boos to play when the commissioner talks.
Yeah, I mean,
like the commissioners, I was like, it was like the commissioner's idea, like, so it's good to see him take himself slightly less seriously. I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's one of those more traditional things than like him trying to endear himself to anyone. But I agree, the fact that he's willing to go through that effort and get it set up, credit to him for being able to take a joke.
Yeah, can I say one more thing? And I think I brought this up. Like, this is so amazing to me that we talk about the draft this way. I just want to bring up my old man story again from, like, when I was in elementary school. The draft was something I listened to on AM radio before school. Then it was like on a Tuesday. Like, that was the whole draft. It was like, they didn't even put it on TV. It was only on the radio. And it was boring to tears because you had to wait so long between picks. And I would wake up at 6 o'clock and start listening to the radio. It's so amazing to me now that it's become this big business. It's weird.
Yeah, but it's this
long story.
The spectacle doesn't transcend like it does in other sports. Like, NBA maybe has the closest to it, but for the most part, people only care about the first lottery picks. They don't really care about what happens afterwards.
In basketball, that's all that matters, right?
Yeah, it's just the first 12 players. That's the entire attention to, and most of the action happens in the off season because it's such a transient league. Baseball, no one pays attention to the baseball draft because 95% of the players never play in the major leagues. The NFL is like the one sport where like the draft has like clear cut impact going into the next like 3 to 9 months because those guys all play. They all have a chance to play right away.
Right. All right, let's get into our predictions.
All right, so it's prediction time. So, Zeb, I'm going to hit you off first. Prediction number 1, over under 10.5 total picks for the Seahawks.
Under.
Under. All right.
Yep.
Ross?
I'm going to go under as well.
I'm going to go over. 7 is way too low. They've got a bunch of picks. They're going to turn that first into 5 picks easily. Over under Zeb, 3.5 draft day trades for the Seahawks.
Just overall?
Overall.
Um,
That includes players, so they could just trade players straight up.
yeah, I'll go over.
Okay. Ross.
Over.
I think it's going to be closer to 5. I see the Seahawks looking at this draft where there's a lot of movement potential with those wide receiver opportunities. This one's an interesting one. I want to know what you guys' thoughts. Are we going to see over under 2.5 quarterbacks drafted in the NFC West alone?
For the whole draft?
Is the NFC West 4 teams going to draft 2.5 quarterbacks over under?
Over.
Over.
I'm with you
Alex
guys
Magoo.
over. I think Seattle needs to look at drafting someone. I think the Rams are and the Niners have to.
Yeah.
Zeb, over yes or no? Is Pete going to take his shirt off in this draft?
No, he's sure not.
Ross, what you feeling?
I think he will. I think he's going to spill something on his shirt and have to.
I'm going to say no. It's actually John that's going to take his shirt off. That's the surprise. Zeb, yes or no? Are you going to watch the entire first round?
I can't think of anything I'd rather do. Yes.
Ross, what about you?
Depends on how long it takes. I might have to do something in the afternoons. But I'll watch as much of it as I can.
I'm going to say no. Even if we're given the opportunity, I don't watch a lot of the first round because the Seahawks don't pick until like the tail end, and they're not going to draft until like 7:30 or something like that, and they're going to end up trading away anyway. So I'm not going to watch. I'll wait until it gets close, and then I'll be like everyone else and be disappointed that we traded out of the first again.
I'm curious to see if it goes faster because they're doing it this way, or if it's going to take longer.
You would think it'd go a little faster, but they still have the same time allowance, I guess. So.
Right.
Yeah, but if they're doing pauses and all that kind of stuff, and they're having technical difficulties, shit
True.
could go till midnight.
That's
oh my
true.
God.
I definitely see Friday going pretty late, the second and third round. Final prediction, Zeb, yes or no? Pundits will hate what John and Pete do.
Yes, some will.
Ross?
I think it'll be mixed, but 80% dislike it.
I'm going to say no. Pundits will love what the Seahawks do because they're going to end up with like 12 plus picks, and everyone will say, well, you know what? We can't judge them on quality yet, but quantity-wise, that's a lot of players.
Possibly. I can see that.
And gentlemen, that is our pre-draft show. Shoutouts.
My shout-outs to Yumi. I'm using her room as a studio today. Thank her. And for Tony for quite often listening in, although I think he missed today.
Oh, I see that Tony's playing Warhammer right now, so maybe he's chiming in the background.
Oh.
Shout out to Maddie Brown for always having awesome, unsubstantiated rumors to talk about. And shout out to Alex Magoo.
Alex Magoo, that was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Shout outs to the gentlemen. This has been a social distancing exercise. We're the Hawkscast podcast. Check us out at hawkscast.com, on Twitter at Seahawks Podcast, at Seahawks Forum. I am Sam. With me as always is Zeb and Ross. And have a happy draft and go Hawks.
Go Hawks.